Good afternoon. Today is Monday, the 2nd of September 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish, delighted to be joined by Diane, Rasmussen, McAdie, and also Ben Rubin. Well, a bit of a gloomy day in Plymouth, as you can see, but we'll say it's still summer-ish. But my goodness, on the political scene, things seem to just get worse. I don't think I've ever started off a UK Column News with an email, but this time I think this is the one to show. And it's a gentleman called Graham who sent quite a long email. This is just part of it. But in it, he's saying that the superficial charm from Keir Starmer has evaporated, leaving a man with no conscience or humanity. This does not bode well for the UK public. And then he goes on to say that he is personally worried about publishing this letter in case he's arrested and locked up for expressing my heartfelt opinion. But here it is anyway. So that's courage. But Graham, alongside many other people in the country, really beginning to wonder just what sort of a man Keir Starmer is. And Graham in that email does actually say, in his opinion, Keir Starmer is dangerous. Certainly, I would agree with that comment. Let's just have a look at this headline, which was from the Daily Mail. It was sent through to me, dated the 10th of April 2023. But it's saying not just dishonest, but deeply hypocritical. Guy Adams investigates how after Sir Keir Starmer went to 21 meetings of the Sentencing Council, it decided not all child sex offenders should go to prison. And the details in the article, we'll just skim through it, but of course you can always hold the screen and have a look at this. So Sir Keir attended 21 of 23 meetings at which the Sentencing Council formulated new guidelines related to 50 different sex offences. They ranged from rape and sexual assault, prostitution, grooming, sex trafficking, voyeurism, exposure, and child pornography. And eventually the council decided that 20 of these crimes could, in certain circumstances, be punished via community orders rather than prison sentences. And the article went on to point out that that number of the community orders included a total of 8 offences where the principal victim is a child, sexual assault of a child under 13, indecent photographs of children, to paying for the sexual services of a child or arranging and facilitating the sexual exploitation of a child. And the paper says this happened all on Sir Keir's watch, and there's absolutely no evidence that he ever objected to these on paper, and nor did he publicly give a flicker of concern. But let's bring this in because this was the Labour Party canvassing effectively, where they were attacking Rishi Sunak and saying, do you think adults convicted of sexually assaulting children should go to prison? And as the Daily Mail said quite rightly, utter hypocrisy, but what a reflection on the UK Prime Minister. Now let's come to The Guardian, because this starts to allow us to see what I think is cognitive dissonance. People, including long-standing journalists, simply don't understand what they're looking at. This is William Keegan from The Guardian, and his headline is "Why Are Starmer and Reeves So Determined to Bring Britain Down?" In the article, he starts off very soon talking about policing and concerns over the police not investigating crimes. But by the end of the article, he's talking about leaving the EU and the wonders of the European Investment Bank. So William Keegan seems to be very confused as to what's going on in the country. But surprisingly, if we go back, The Guardian was pointing out some time ago, 2016, in fact, concerns about what the government had set up with regard to intelligence units and effectively spying on the population, in this case UK Muslims. But the organisation was RICU, the Home Office's Research, Information and Communications Unit. And The Guardian straight away talking about shadowy propaganda. The unit originally inspired by a unit set up during the Cold War period, but here in 2016 was the government still using this type of shadowy organisation to spy on the British public. And of course, all of this spying infrastructure is not only still in existence in UK, it's growing. And if we follow through a little bit more on that article, here under delivering the propaganda, we get another area of concern, and that is much of the work is outsourced. So we could say bad enough to have the government spying on the public, but when it's outsourced, what is government and what is actually private sector, and what controls and checks and balances operate between the two? Well, some of our politicians did take the trouble to actually ask questions about the RICU unit. This was an answer given 7th of March 2023, and in it talked about the levels of staffing, 22 allocated staff. It talked about the spend, and if you have a look at the box in the bottom left-hand corner on screen, you can see it dropping from 19 million in 2018-19 down to 5 million in 22-23, but nevertheless, the organisation is still in operation. And of course, it claims you can't really talk about it because the unauthorised disclosure of classified information damages the ability of the government to keep the public safe. Now, this is an area that the UK column has been warning about for a great many years. Back in 2015, we were talking about David Cameron's unravelling Stasi state, and we put in a number of key pointers: behavioural change, the organisation common purpose. Of course, Francis Maude, Minister for Transparency at that time, but note also Oliver Letwin, and of course Theresa May. So this was a really comprehensive state spying system on the public, and it has then been taken forward through later governments. And this is a quote from Suella Braverman as Home Secretary at the time, saying it's of the utmost importance that we're not deterred from our efforts to fight terrorism and extremism. And what I want to stress is the way that organisations are joined together. So she goes on to say, for Prevent to be successful, it cannot be delivered by the Home Office alone. It requires a close-knit partnership of government departments, sectors, local authorities, policing, and community organisations, a partnership to spy on the public. This is absolutely a Stasi state, and I'm going to put that in a big red banner across that particular slide, because people need to wake up to the fact that we have a government which increasingly is hostile to the public. Let's move through this a little bit. This is some comment on Prevent. It came through the so-called independent review body for Prevent. But note what it says. It's talking about why we need Prevent, where we see threats to integration and the fabric of our communities from extremism. The Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities will lead the work to tackle this. They'll use their experience and insight to inform training on wider extremist harms. So fighting extremism has now become a role of other government departments, and these are departments which are very close to communities. And if we have a look a bit more in the detail, we can see here it's talking about Channel. This is another part of the counter-terrorism system, and it says that Channel panels are chaired by local authorities and include health professionals, social workers, police and other professionals, all spying without any need to tell the target that they are actually being watched by all of these various departments. If it sounds like the Stasi in East Germany, this is worse because of the databases that go with it. And where does it lead us? To interesting organisation. Here's Protect UK, which is putting out current national threat levels. levels, and they're saying at the moment the threat level from terrorism is substantial. This is all ramping up fear on the population. It goes on to say that Protect is counter-terrorism alliance, a groundbreaking joint partnership bringing together the knowledge of policing the private sector and the public sector to counter terrorism. I'm sure that Ben is listening into this because this is a large part of what he's been warning about. But if we look at what this organisation says it is doing, let's just highlight this one. Basically, it's saying that through guidance, advice and online learning, we want everyone to be equipped with the knowledge and confidence to help tackle threats of terrorism. Think about that. Everybody is to be trained to counter terrorism. And of course, where do we want to go? We want to go to children. And this is one of the many documents aimed at children, 13, 14 in this case, telling them what to do in a terrorist attack: run, hide and tell. But what caught my attention when having a look at this segment was that the insurance industry is also involved, when in fact the reinsurance industry, so we're at the level of Lloyd's. And what it's saying is that it's the expertise from the insurance industry which is going to provide financial protection against the risk of terrorism. But this organisation operating alongside the government's own counter-terrorist organisations, but if we come down to the meat of it, insurance is about making profit. And so what is the true loyalty and allegiance of the reinsurance industry? Is it to protect the country, or is it to make profit out of the woes of created terrorist incidents? So just having a little look at the people involved, this is actually the advisory board. It's not the main board of this organisation, but my eye caught Sir Oliver Letwin there, Trevor Maynard and Sir Stephen Lovegrove and General Sir Nick Carter at the bottom. But there was also a Professor Jarza Blabkowski, and I decided just to have a little listen into what she has to say on this subject.
The report that's being launched today is called Between State and Market and looks at how protection gap entities address catastrophic risk, which is growing in the world.
Thank you all for coming away from pubs, cold beer and football screens. I appreciate that it's a hard act to follow, but I and my colleagues here have done some interesting research. We've got a great panel, so let's hope we make it worth your while, this sacrifice.
I want to commend Paula and her team for a very insightful and timely piece of work. Many of you will know Paula from her previous work on the global reinsurance industry. She and her team have since been collecting data on how governments and markets around the world can better work together to address the growing threat of catastrophic risk.
We may be living in a dangerous place, but if we worried about it.
So there we are. We're mixing reinsurance with terrorist threats. I get a very bad feeling about what's actually going on here, but maybe this is a good time to bring you in, Ben, because you've been warning about these partnerships between the private and the public sector. And here we've now got it mixing around in the murky field of the counter-terrorism operations. What do you think?
I think that we're up against something evil, actually. That's what I think that we're up against. And as you say, we've been warning about this for quite some time. I've been warning about public-private partnerships. That's the dictionary definition of fascism as set out by Mussolini. But what we're also looking at is communism as well, and the current blend of fascism and communism, which is ultimately the public-private partnership. That's what it is. It's what it's doing. It's how it behaves. And you've talked about the Stasi, which was the East German secret police. And East Germany was communist. And one of the reasons that I do the work that I do, that I come and sit here on the column on a Monday and talk to you about the things that I talk about, is because of my own personal experience of communist nations. And one that really sticks with me is a visit that I took back in 2002 to Cambodia, which is a beautiful, small little country in Southeast Asia, nestled between Thailand, Laos and Vietnam. It is unbelievably beautiful, has an extraordinary heritage and culture, some incredible temples, and one of the most culturally rich and incredible places on earth. And actually, the people there are some of the most peaceful and welcoming human beings that I've ever come across. Yet in 1975, this peaceful nation was overrun by a regime focused on absolute barbarity. Let's hear from John Pilger.
The new rulers of Cambodia call 1975 Year Zero, the dawn of an age in which there would be no families, no sentiment, no expressions of love or grief, no medicines, no hospitals, no schools, no books, no learning, no holidays, no music, no song, no post, no money, only work and death. Cambodia. Where is Cambodia, some of you might ask? Unlike Vietnam, its neighbor, Cambodia has been virtually sealed for 4 years, its suffering invisible. In a world of saturation news, there has been no news of what was really done to more than 7 million people, of whom at least 2 million are missing, believed murdered. That's about a third of the entire population. Proportionately, it's Birmingham, Manchester, and London exterminated. For me, coming here has been like stumbling into something I could never imagine. And what follows is the first complete film report by Westerners from the ashes of a gentle land. And I have to say there are scenes which may upset some of you.
So that's a clip from a film called Cambodia, Year Zero, The Silent Death of Cambodia, by John Pilger, released in 1979. I'm going to show a couple more clips of that. I recommend seeking it out. It is an incredibly powerful and moving and highly relevant film, because what we're seeing in this country and elsewhere are the same patterns of behavior, the same patterns of language, of ideology that led to the atrocities that took place in Cambodia in the mid-70s. 2 million dead, a third of the country. You heard what he just said there. The same as Birmingham, Manchester, and London being exterminated. Yeah. How did this happen? Well, at least in part, it was due to these two gentlemen, to Nixon and Kissinger, and Cambodia's proximity to their other war in Vietnam. And in order to intimidate the Viet Cong and try to get them to negotiate a peaceful resolution to the war that the Americans were losing, they decided to brutalize Cambodia, to destabilize the regime there. They dropped 100,000 tons of bombs, the equivalent of 5 Hiroshimas, illegally and secretly. Yeah, this was kept from the American people. They invented a term called collateral damage, which has entered common parlance. It's something that we hear all the time. They invented it. They invented the idea of friendly fire to provide cover for the atrocities that were taking place on the ground there. And what emerged from that conflagration? Let's find out.
Out of the inferno of bombs came Pol Pot, a former Buddhist monk, and the Khmer Rouge, whose revolution had never enjoyed a popular base until Nixon's madman theory of war. The bombing upset the delicate balance of royalists, republicans, and communists. It triggered a war that caused at least 1 million dead and wounded, and tore apart the very fabric of Cambodia.
So, they destroyed the country. They destroyed it economically. They created hyperinflation. They carried out acts of unspeakable cultural vandalism, including turning the National Library into a pigsty and destroying its entire contents. And most brutally, by turning the people against each other, the poor against the rich, and most notably, the young against the old. Let's see here the Khmer Rouge soldiers who were followers of Pol Pot.
These are captured Khmer Rouge troops. All of them have taken part in mass murder. Why did they kill these people?
តើហេតុអីបានជាសម្លាប់ប្រជាជនទាំងអស់ហ្នឹង
បានជាពួកពលពតអៀងសេរីបញ្ជាឲ្យសម្លាប់ប្រជាជនទាំងអស់នេះព្រោះគោលបំណងរបស់វាដើម្បីបំបត្តិពូជសាសន៍កម្ពុជា
He said that the Pol Pot Ieng-Sary commanded to kill all these people.
Would you ask them how many people they killed?
តើបងម្នាក់បានសម្លាប់ប្រជាជនអស់ប្រមាណដែរ
ខ្ញុំនៅក្នុងក្រុមក្នុងក្រសួងគឺសម្លាប់អស់250នាក់
For this group 250.
He killed 250?
Yeah.
And the other man?
បងមួយទៀតតើ
នៅក្នុងក្រុមខ្ញុំសម្លាប់អស់2500នាក់
In his group is 2500.
How many were there in a group?
មកក្នុងមួយក្រុមមានប្រមាណអ្នកក្រុមបង
នៅក្នុងក្រុមខ្ញុំហ្នឹងដែលគេបញ្ជាទៅឲ្យសម្លាប់ហ្នឹងគ្នា8នាក់
8 person in the group.
So 8 persons killed 250, 8 persons killed 2500.
នៅ50នាក់ដែលគេឲ្យបញ្ជាសម្លាប់មនុស្ស
50 person for
50 killed 2000.
So those young men there, most of them teenagers, when this happened, killed between 30 and 300 people each, based on the testimony that we've just heard. Yeah, it led to scenes like this. These are the killing fields in Phnom Penh. It led to scenes like this. This is the S-21 torture chamber, also in Phnom Penh, the capital of Cambodia. I've been there myself. And why did they do it? Well, we've heard about the barbarity committed by the Americans, but also because of things like this, ideas such as social justice, which we hear all of the time in the West, coming out of the media, coming out of the academic system. And it's Marxist. It's fundamentally Marxist. There's a direct link here. Look at this quote from Marx. The tradition of all the dead generations weighs like a nightmare on the brain of the living. That is year zero. That's what he's saying. Where else are we hearing this? Kamala Harris. What can be unburdened by what has been? That is year zero. That's what she's describing. That's what those words amount to. Where else can we see it? A bit closer to home. The radical change agenda to rebuild the foundations of the country. As Mike very, very rightly pointed out last week, you can't rebuild the foundations without pulling down the entire house. Starmer has form. He is a communist. He went to work in a Czechoslovakian work camp under the communist regime in the 1980s. He is a Fabian, a member of the Fabian Society, the society who since 1884 have been pursuing a globalist communist revolution. He is also ruthless. He's very happy to tell us that. Anyone who's been watching his television appearances over the past few weeks won't have failed to notice this. He is cold, he is dismissive of others, and I believe that he has the potential within him to commit acts of atrocity against his own people. I believe that to be true. How are we seeing this manifest in society? Well, it's manifesting culturally. So we can see here that the Anglo-Saxon is being deleted from history by our own institutions. This from Nottingham. We've seen similar behaviour coming out of Cambridge recently and further afield. We can see the death of England being featured at our national theatre. And this is just one example of what's happening in culture, in television, in theatreland, that is counter to the national interest. We can see it on the streets of London when people like Ricky Thompson, a Labour councillor, calls for the throats of political dissidents to be cut. And we can see it with the introduction of new citizens into the country. You can see here, this is from TikTok, ladies of African extraction saying that we will never get our country back. You will never get your country back. They are holding British and Irish passports. And they are telling us unequivocally, I believe, that they don't want us. They're here to replace us. And that's all part of the agenda that the regime is putting forward, and it's the same agenda essentially that we saw play out in Cambodia under the Khmer Rouge.
Ben, thank you very much. Really serious segment there, but it's one that needs to be talked about. And of course, what we've also got to realise is that every creed, every nationality that is present in UK today will be played against each other in order to push this agenda through. But Diane, let's bring you in because, well, you're seeing the end of civilization.
Well, that's what the conference said, Brian, anyway. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was at a conference called the McAdie, which is a yearly conference sponsored by an organization called Ideas Matter, which, for me, it was a great relief in a way to attend a non-woke, non-captured conference with an academic angle to it. So just as a reminder, I cover things a lot in real time on my Twitter. So if you don't follow me on Twitter and you'd like to do so, please do so at Diane UKC. That's Diane UKC. So that was me on the first day of the conference, obviously being very academic with my glass of wine, in the evening only, of course. So it was really an interesting conference for a lot of reasons. And the title of the conference has a yearly theme, because it's a yearly conference, as I said, so that this year it was called Civilization Under Siege, with a question mark at the end of it. So we're asking the question, is civilization under siege? And if it is, do we save it? Do we move on? Do we create something entirely new and start over again? So that was kind of the purpose of the whole weekend. One thing that is interesting to note, and just to say, of course, I have a PhD studying photojournalism, so I take a lot of photos when I'm going to do my reporting. So these are photos I took in my hotel room. And I thought it was interesting that for a non-woke conference, there were messages of sustainability and recycling in green everywhere, all over the room. So these are just 3 photos that I took from sustainability, do not disturb, I'm being green. They actually brainwashed you to the point of saying, if you don't want your towels changed today, we'll plant a tree in your honor. Just let us know and we'll put another tree up for you. But no, thanks. I want my towels changed when I'm in a hotel. So just a couple of the speakers that I wanted to highlight. So here's one from, this is a tweet from Professor Dennis Hayes, who's a good colleague of mine. He's the chair of the Academics for Academic Freedom, and I know him well. He's working with me on my case personally right now. And he took this photo of Andrew Doyle. So I learned a lot about Andrew Doyle. I only knew him from GB News on Free Speech Nation, if any of you watch him. But he actually has a doctorate from Oxford, and he was a lecturer at Oxford. So his talk was about literature and the arts and the death of the arts in the current era. He was amazing at quoting Shakespeare out of nowhere, and it sounded beautiful as it would. But he made a couple of interesting points about the arts, which is to say that there could be no sort of genius work taking place today in this era, because it's not possible, because the group identity is so much more important than the individual identity. So artists are no longer able to express themselves, so that, musicians such as Mozart or any of the other, artistic geniuses that we have in our past would not be able to do what they're doing now, because they would be suppressed for so many different reasons. And again, going along with that group identity. But really, the one of the main speakers that really got me interested was the opening keynote speaker, Professor Frank Ferretti, who is an emeritus professor at the University of Kent. And his entire lecture is available on his Substack, so that those links will be in the show notes. But just a couple of things that I wanted to say about what he said in this opening discussion, which kind of set the tone for the whole conference, was that one of the, going back to what Ben was saying about destroying history, if we have no history, we have no civilization, because civilization is developed throughout a history. And by going back and destroying history in various ways, a little bit more, which I will talk about in just a minute, we can't have a civilization. He talked about the process of de-civilization, which he feels is taking place now, especially with young people who are particularly captured by cultural Marxism. So that, for example, trans ideology is the opposite of civility in history, and in particular, the way the trans activists are behaving when they're going out and calling people names and, doing all kinds of degenerate things that we see happening in some of the Pride conferences and so on. And so the question is, what do we do about it, and do we do anything about it? And so that was a big part of the theme of the conference. I would say as well that one of my favorite sessions was called Reclaiming the Institutions, where they were talking specifically about universities and schools and the things that we've had for years and years in Western civilization. And something that a colleague of mine noted is that there was a very apparent lack of awareness of globalism and what globalism is doing to play a part in this process of what's happening to Western civilization. And so in my typical fashion, I asked a question that shut everybody up, which always seems to happen when I ask a question. And that was, since there were so many academics in the room, and I said, how many of us are willing to stand up and do something about this? Because all of our research funding comes from the UK government. We all know the association between Starmo and Davos, for example. So all of our funding is coming down from promoting globalism, promoting the Sustainable Development Goals, and so on. And how many of us are willing to change our research, are willing to change what we're agreeing to teach in the classroom as a result of this need to fight globalism? Complete silence in the room. There were very few people, apart from my new colleague, who recognized the impact that globalism has on the topic that we're talking about. So something else that goes into a specific example of what I can certainly talk about is libraries. So if we go on to the next slide around the plot to turn the library into a safe space for indoctrination, that was another Substack post that Professor Ferretti wrote and posted a few days ago. And I won't read this entire quote out here. You could read it yourself, but I think it's a really important point about this idea of decolonizing the library, which I've talked about on the column in previous segments. The idea of decolonizing the library basically means we're getting rid of our history. And by doing so, we're erasing the whatever has happened. We are now unburdened by what has been because we've deleted it, we've erased it, we've changed what's in our libraries, we've changed what we're teaching our children. And so by getting rid of this, we're trying, basically Professor Ferretti, and I agree with him completely, says that by erasing those things, we're not only erasing what we have developed in Western society and in civilization, but also setting the stage forward for cultural Marxism, because we are no longer unburdened by the past, right? And we can see this specifically. This has happened a few days ago, but I haven't been on the news in a couple of weeks. So just to catch you up a little bit, you might have seen this already, mainstream media, that SILIP Wales, which is the professional body that I was mobbed out of, which is the professional body for librarians in the UK, had received £130,000 to tell librarians in Wales how to deal with the, quote, dominant paradigm of whiteness. This is, of course, Wales we're talking about, which is interesting. But they said basically don't have any meetings in buildings that might have a racist past. So they might be named after someone who has some sort of racism in the background. So we're not supposed to use those buildings and contribute money to them. You can go have a deep dive into what they talk about here on the SILIP website, SILIP Wales Advocacy, Anti-Racist Library Collections. And of course, as we know, anti-racism is racism. It's just a different name for it. And just a couple of specific examples that I've got to share with you here. I was just out in my local Waterstones over the weekend and happened to see these are all children's books that are featured as like part of the featured new books that are out. You see consistently the rainbow being used, right? So it's easy to get away with saying, well, children like pretty colors, but there is rainbow. There is Greg the Sausage Roll. There is rainbow magic with the Toy Fairy. There is puppy corn. There is be normal. So that's the message of queerness being the opposite of normal, which is obviously part of the cultural Marxist agenda. And just to highlight what's going on in the States, just my last bit here, about what they're doing in libraries in general in America and in the UK, but in libraries in particular in the States are having a huge battle right now because there's a woman, Amanda Jones, who's written a book called That Librarian, and she's been promoting these kinds of books in her children's library for, very underage children. And she wrote a book saying, oh, they've censored me and how awful censorship is. But at the same time, she would be one of those people to say, we can't have gender critical books in the library because those would be offensive to trans people. Brian.
Diane, thank you very much for that. And I'll just say to our audience that the content of each news that we produce is done by the individual presenters. And so the segment that we've just delivered, I think, is quite extraordinary because it's clear that between the three of us, we are all seeing the same pattern start to unfold in this country. And we will continue to warn our audience about what's really happening. Now, if you like what the UK column is doing, then please support us. for £5 a month. That's membership. Basically allows us to do what we're doing. We want more people on board so that we can expand and produce more material. So if you can bring in others, that would be wonderful. Of course, the material we produce, we want it to be shared. We're trying hard on many platforms to do that. Facebook still doesn't like us, so we'll say we're shadow banned there. You can also help us by making a purchase in the shop. And if you haven't been to the UK Column shop, then please visit. It's for everybody. You don't have to be a member to make a purchase. And we'd still like to say we do have copies of Agenda 21, Your Life in Their Hands, still available. And we're getting such tremendous feedback from this first glossy brochure. There will be more. So if you want more, then please make sure you have bought one of these first editions. Now, tomorrow at 1 o'clock, we've got discussing the second climate masterclass. This was a very popular initiative which Mike Robinson set up, and it's been so popular that the second climate masterclass is being introduced there at 1 o'clock tomorrow. We'd also like to say we're getting really excited for the 19th of October in Bristol for the UK Column on location. We've got some great speakers coming in. We've got Piers Robinson, David Miller, Peter Ford, Bob Moran, the cartoonist, Ahmed Malik, Katie Jo Murphy, Claire Wills Harrison, and there are more which we will announce. So if you haven't got a ticket, please buy one and come and join us. And yes, we do look forward to meeting and speaking with as many people as we can. What else have we got? We've got UK Column at the International Centre for 9/11 Justice, Aviation Impossibilities, deconstructing the official story of the 9/11 hijackings and air defence failures. And that'll be going out Sunday, September the 8th, 6 to 10 p.m. BST. So watch out for that. And what does that take us to? Oh, yes, the Heritage Party are running a conference. They kindly invited Mike Robinson and myself to speak, which we're delighted to do. So that's Saturday, the 28th of September, and the venue is in Reading. It is a ticketed event, but you can go online and sort out the details for that for yourself. So, Diane, let's bring you back because you've got a little bit of an update, an important update on Fenethy.
Yes, Brian. So the fight for justice for Fenethy survivors, as well as for any survivors of historic child abuse in Scotland, continues. So I've got a media update as well as, I guess you could say, a parliamentary update. There's been some press in the last couple of weeks as a result, I think, of if you remember, well, I'm sure you remember the gutsy woman, Natasha, who you interviewed, who went in and explored the Fenethy house itself. So as a result of that, we have seen some press kind of following that while you were away, Brian. And this article in particular is an interview with Lynn Sheeran, who's one of the Fenethy survivors, who's been at the front of the campaign the whole time. Who I have to say right now is not watching today because she is in New York having a nice holiday, which is great. But she did talk about the building itself and the significance that it holds for the women as a result, I think, of the publicity that we got from Natasha and from our interview with her, saying the place should be bulldozed. It stands as a shrine to the abuse that hundreds of girls suffered there. It makes me sick knowing it's still there despite the abuse and all the years that have gone by. And we've got, evidence on the UK Column website that has been written previously about the fact that the sale of Fenethy House itself was illegal because it was not supposed to be sold to a private individual when the school closed down, which it was by Glasgow City Council. So that is an illegal situation there. There's a group called Fenethy Voices on TikTok. I personally am not a TikTok fan, but if anyone out there is using TikTok, take a look at their Fenethy Voices channel. What's interesting is they've taken videos of the UK Column content. If you can see on the next slide, please. There's videos of the content itself where they've actually just taken a video of the previous coverage and put it onto their TikTok, which I thought was a really interesting workaround to get the UK Column content out there by using their video on their TikToks. Something that the women have done just very, very recently is they've put out this advert, which is along a road in Glasgow, asking if you were there at Fernethy, if you know anyone who attended, please contact us on our Facebook group so that you can join the campaign. So I think this is probably a positive step just to get more strength in numbers, which unfortunately they're going to need. I think there's some media out there, which I'll just cover myself, of what has happened. Here's something from STV. There's several articles out there about this, saying that basically what happened was earlier in the summer in June, the Petitions Committee at the Scottish Parliament had said that they were going to write unanimously in agreement back to the Deputy First Minister and the First Minister of Scotland, saying that they supported expanding the scheme for eligibility for redress, which again was something that I was able to contribute to by writing evidence to Scottish Parliament, saying that this should be access for everyone who was abused in care in Scotland, not just people who were there under certain circumstances or for certain periods of time. Unfortunately, Kate Forbes came back and rejected that call. So it will be interesting to see what happens with this, because what's happening is that the idea anyway was that the committee said if this is rejected by the First Minister, the Deputy First Minister, then we will try to bring it to the floor. I just want to read a little bit of what Kate Forbes said. So basically she said the same thing that Shona Robinson said several months ago when we first were in Parliament earlier this year. And she said, quote, she mentioned the so-called independent researchers report, which supported what her side of it was. No mention of my report. But she said, as the former Deputy First Minister set out to the committee, the existing eligibility criteria reflect the core purpose of the scheme, which was designed primarily for those vulnerable children who were in long-term care, often isolated with limited or no contact with their families, children who are resident on a short-term respite or holiday basis under arrangements involving their parents, such as those who attended Fernethy House. Again, it should be Fernethy Residential School, and she keeps using house, which is incorrect. We're not in that position. So, and she ignored everything, of course, that I had to say, as they have been doing all along. But so we see that the back and forth with what's going on, that basically the committee sees, well, we need to make this justice for everyone who was abused in care for accessing Redress Scotland scheme. And then we see Kate Forbes just passing it back. So the women thought they were making some progress, but now we're not so sure what's going to happen next. So we have to continue to put pressure on Scottish government. So, Brian, I know you've been involved as well, so I don't know if you have any quick comments about this before we move on.
Well, Diane, thank you. I think it's really good to see that the Fernethy women are becoming ever more active in getting awareness of the case out. This is very important. And I think it's also good to see that their efforts are bringing in a response from other news sources, legacy news, but at least they're getting involved now. But how typical it is that the Scottish government is more concerned about money, how much money they'd have to pay out, than they are on the welfare of the women, or the hundreds, thousands of women who were abused at that location as little children. But of course, with Keir Starmer, they've now got a precedent, haven't they? Because we've got a Prime Minister who clearly does not have much respect for abuse victims, particularly children. So we've got to keep fighting to make sure that these women and other adults who've been abused as children in particular, that they receive the just recognition and the justice that they deserve. So we'll keep pushing on that. Well, if there's no money to support the victims of abuse or survivors of abuse, there's plenty of money to prosecute the war in Ukraine. And I have to say today, in a little short update, it is truly incredible, the propaganda and spin coming out of Western media. BBC here is almost beside itself, because the reality on the front is not good for Ukraine. I'll be coming on to that. But here's the BBC front page from earlier this morning. morning, meeting the Ukrainian recruits preparing for new battle. This is a tragic article because, of course, these are older men. They're getting a couple of weeks training. They're going to be sent to the front up against seasoned Russian troops, and they're going to pay the price. But what else is the BBC trying to tell us? Well, that the war is going well, but it's not. Let's have a look at this video. I've tried to share out UK column coverage of alternative media sources. This is History Legends, but this was a particularly good report, and I encourage people to go and see the full video on YouTube. Let's listen to what he has to say.
My friends, nobody in history managed to break through the industrial area of the Donbass head on. That was until this summer. That was the situation in my last video 1 month ago, right after the Russian breakthrough near Prores along the railway line. And this is the situation now. The only word I can think of to describe all this is a debacle. The worst is that many of these villages were captured intact. The Russians advanced 7 kilometers in this direction, 10 kilometers to the south. Put simply, all the Ukrainian defensive lines are getting rolled over one after the other. By-step analysis of the situation on the Pokrovsk front. On the 29th of August, pro-Ukrainian Telegram channel Deep State UA wrote, "For a long time, the situation in Donbass was quite appropriately characterized as difficult, but controlled. However, now it is out of control. Currently, it seems that our front in Donbass has collapsed."
Out of control, Ukrainian defences collapsing. Of course, none of this appearing on the BBC or indeed the Ministry of Defence. If we have a look at the Twitter, the latest Twitter report from the UK Ministry of Defence, it's saying that the Russian ground forces have accelerated their advance. It's talking about the Pokrovsk front itself, but of course they're advancing in many other places, but this is not mentioned, and they try and squash this by saying the operational tempo on other front lines has remained low. So let's have a look at the sorts of propaganda videos that the UK Ministry of Defence is putting out. Let's have a listen to this one.
We believe in you. You are our hope. We are fighting to survive. Just we don't have any other choice. If we won't fight, we won't live like as a nation, as a country. We will disappear.
And of course, by fighting the West proxy war, Ukraine is being destroyed. But what does UK propaganda say? That Ukraine is being rebuilt as it is being destroyed. Let's look at this second clip. So for those of you listening in, as Ukraine is destroyed, according to the British Ministry of Defence, no worries, it's being rebuilt, and they're giving the figures and the value of the rebuilding going on, the length of the roads. This is complete nonsense and madness. But what's more tragic is the fact that we're still training troops, minimum training, sending them back to die on the front line. So this is another little video from UK about our brave efforts training Ukrainians.
Take care. Down. You are agree with you. You're thank you. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Hope because you are more attention. Okay.
Well, I can believe that both those men are actually good men, but of course they're being used by the state. This is a proxy war, and certainly those Ukrainians are almost certainly being sent back to die because they're going to be fighting that Russian advance against highly seasoned troops. But the propaganda gets worse from UK because in this next film clip, apparently the Russians haven't got enough water now. We were told they didn't have enough shells and missiles. That was over a year ago. And of course, we've seen the Russian attacks increase, but now we've got this little effort from the Ministry of Defence, which would have us believe that Russian pilots are short of water. So this is just sheer nonsense, but the reality of how much we've sent to Ukraine, if we just pop this one on screen, this is an excellent article. We'll make sure the details are available so that you can actually visit the site and read from the Defence Journal. But the list of weapons systems, financial aid, other aid, billions and billions of pounds being poured into Ukraine, which is being destroyed as a result of the West's effort to create a proxy war with Russia. And then we get this sort of nonsense that, of course, wonder weapons such as the Challenger and the Abrams tank were going to solve the problem for Ukraine. Of course, that hasn't happened. Then it was to be the F-16, but the first F-16 the Ukrainians have been flying has crashed, which has been an utter disaster. Now, this is extremely poignant footage because the Ministry of Defence here in UK talking about these ladies acting as translators, but there seems to be more to this story. Let's have a look at the first clip.
Basically, it was more decision of our parents because they wanted us to be on a safe place. And we start looking for a place where we can go, and we decided it's going to be UK.
Then we arrived to Manchester International Airport, and I saw many people just walking around. They had different clothes, smiling. They were absolutely smiling. And the smell, well, the sounds, they were quite different for me. That was the smell and sound of another culture, another page of my life. So I really like it from the very beginning.
And we found volunteers, so she helped us to find a host family. And also I asked her, is it possible to find any job in UK? And she said, yeah, if you speak English, you can go on military base and become military interpreter. It's like, oh wow, I want to do this. So then I just arrived to UK, I applied for this job, and a month later, or maybe less, I've already moved to my first camp. That was the start, and even being in UK, this is the way how I can help Ukraine. And to be honest, I didn't look for other job. I was only waiting for information where and when I need to be.
Можете повертатись на точку відпочивати.
Дякую.
Can they take body armors?
Yeah.
Да, все можна знімати, відпочивайте.
So what's the reality? The parents helped them leave Ukraine for their own safety, leaving the rest of the Ukrainian population to fight. What would have happened if our young women had done this in Britain in 1939-40? But of course, the British state wants these people because they are pawns in the proxy game. So there is much more to discuss. But we can see, if we just pop this one up on screen, we can see here the UK government facilitating things for people if they want to come to UK from Ukraine. So it's no wonder that this situation has gone on. Meanwhile, in the background, we've got local MP, in this case, Luke Pollard, who's getting very excited because he's working with the International Drone Coalition to produce hundreds and thousands of drones for the Ukrainians to use against the Russians. And really, if I have to sum this segment up, it's tragedy for Ukraine. It's tragedy for the Russians being killed in this proxy war. But actually, it's the UK as a nation which is under attack by the flag draped round the shoulders of that young man, which of course is a corrupted national flag for UK. Ben, terrible times. What are we dealing with here? It's actually an attack on the culture of UK.
It's an all-out assault on British culture, and it's manifesting in a number of different ways. And I'm going to talk to you a bit about this idea of cultural Marxism and the way that, in this instance specifically, the music industry is being used to normalise radical totalitarian ideas about the future of our society. So this is Kite Festival coming up on October 5th and 6th. This is a event focused on what they call ideas and music. And as I've been sitting here thinking about talking to you about this, I've realised that a kite is quite an interesting term, because when you send a kite up into the air, everyone looks at the kite and they don't look at what's going on around them on the ground. And I think that's probably what's happening here. Now, this is brought to us by our old friends at Tortoise Media, who we speak about all the time. The new news business set up in 2018 by this fella, James Harding, former BBC and Times editor. You can see him here at Gold's House in Davos, standing in front of a tapestry depicting human children being sacrificed to Satan. I also believe that the tortoise name is a reference to the mascot of the Fabian Society, the secret society that Keir Starmer is a member of, that we spoke about earlier, that are working to implement a single global communist state. That's not confirmed, by the way. That's just an inference that I've made, but I think that it probably does stack up, not least given what I'm going to talk you through now. This is being delivered in partnership with Abbey Road Studios. So it's one of the most famous recording studios in the world. It's where the Beatles recorded the majority of their work between 1962 and 1970. And there is a picture you can see here taken on the zebra crossing outside of Abbey Road for the Abbey Road album released in 1969. And Abbey Road is right at the heart of the British cultural establishment. It's often used by the BBC for live broadcasts and recordings, and it's now owned by Universal Music Group, whose chief executive, Lucian Grange, was awfully afflicted by the COVID back in 2020. He actually almost died, you know. Awful news. And actually it does have official sanction from the BBC as well. This new festival, which has just appeared, it's in its third year, has got coverage from the BBC. They've helped them to promote it. Obviously, James Harding is pulling the strings behind the scenes. And who have they got up on stage to represent the ideas? So, you know, the music agenda, the cultural agenda. We've got a whole bunch of major label recording artists, and they are there to bring people into the conversation and to expose them to ideas from people like Richard Curtis, the filmmaker. He made Notting Hill, Love Actually. He's married to Emma Freud, and he's also a United Nations SDG advocate, and he sits on the leadership group of Gold's House. So he's one of the main people globally pushing the Sustainable Development Goals. We've also got Charlie Booker. Some really big names, yeah. Charlie Booker, probably one of the most prominent journalists and screenwriters in the UK, has been for about 10, 15 years now. Guardian, BBC, Channel 4, and Netflix, where his Black Mirror series has been one of the breakout hits of the past decade, painting an extraordinarily dystopian view of the future of humanity, I should add. Who else have we got there? David Olusoga. He is a professor at Manchester University, but he's also a trustee of Black Equity Organisation, who I've spoken about previously. They are there to promote equity for what they call Black people. And they say that equity goes further than equality, and it requires, they don't say this, I'm saying it, it requires a totalitarian regime to implement. If you want equal outcomes, which is one of the goals of communism, then you have to do that. The only way to do that is through totalitarian governance. That's what he's promoting. That's what is on the agenda at the Kite Festival. Just a couple more for you. Dex Hunter Torek. This is an astonishing gentleman who I have. There we go. It's moved now. Thank you. Head of Global Communications and Marketing at DeepMind, the pioneer of artificial intelligence, which is owned by Google, very closely linked to Tony Blair. Tony Blair described Demis Hassabis, one of the founders of DeepMind, as our Demis. So this is very much in that stable. And from May 2020 until March 2023, Dex Hunter Torek was the VP of Global Communications and Public Engagement at the Oversight Board of Facebook. So one of the top censors in the world, through COVID and through the subsequent period of time that we've all been living through. And then finally, Grace Blakely, who is a journalist, a media commentator. She works with Novara Media. She's been on the BBC, on Question Time, on Good Morning Britain, Piers Morgan, MTV News. She's a writer. She's written this book, Everything That You Know About Capitalism Is Wrong. And she's a diehard communist. She's going to be featuring at this event. That's pretty much, just pulled up 4 or 5 different examples of these types of individuals who are going to be speaking. And I might actually forward this on to Grace Blakely because she doesn't like capitalism, but someone really should tell her that Tortoise Media are backed by capitalism, right? It's paid for by global corporations. And also she needs to be aware, in fact, anyone there needs to be aware that the Tortoise Media are very closely linked to the Rothschild Foundation, who own Waddesdon House. This is an event that they did earlier on in the year. The Rothschild Foundation is also known as Yad Hanadiv, which is was involved in the formulation of Israel and paid for the design and build of the Israeli Supreme Court and the Knesset, which means that, I think that these buildings, the state they represent and the powers behind them appear to be directing Tortoise Media and by extension, almost certainly, the agenda and the speakers at Kite Festival coming up at Abbey Road in October.
Ben, thank you very much for that. Lots of questions to be asked, and it's so important that people really pay attention to what's happening around them. There are a number of things linking together now. We could almost say the beast is emerging. But let's end on a positive note, and this was a wonderful little email sent in by Craig. He said, a dark evil has descended over the West. The genocide in Palestine continues, and he's talking about the Western governments clamping down on human rights defenders, and of course we've got censorship coming in. And what does he say should be happening? He's saying to people, be a light in the darkness, raise your voice, fight back. And that's absolutely right, and it requires all of us to do that to whatever extent we can, whether it's a lot or a little bit. It's beholden on all of us to fight what is happening around us. We will end there. I'm going to say, Diane and Ben, thank you very much for joining me. If you're a member of UK Column, stay with us. There will be UK Column Extra, and we'll delve into Ukraine and those translators, amongst other things. So join us then if you can. If not, we look forward to seeing our audience again at 1 o'clock on Wednesday. Thank you. Bye-bye.